Welcome again to Sport Unlocked with the second episode of the week. Listen back to the early one on all the money issues in sport, particularly football, but we're focusing on our favourite areas of the governing bodies, particularly FIFA in this episode. Joining me, Rob Harris, is ever from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and we're all building up to the Club World Cup next summer, June, July in the United States. No sponsors, no TV backers, but there is a logo now. Slightly curious one. How would you describe it?
It's, for me, an initial coin offering from the latest crypto bods. Roll up. Get your crypto here. I almost clicked on it, I must say. I thought I could get rich.
There's also sort of official music. Is it Things Can Only Get Better? Is that right?
This is what they're calling the audio signature. And, we've had FIFA in recent years commissioned a lot of their own music, getting their own anthems for tournaments. What about this?
Not heard that before, Rob. Not heard that before.
Yeah.
Heard that in a stadium, anyone?
Yeah.
I think there's barely been a stadium I've been in where I haven't heard that recently.
Yeah, Garland Freed from Desire. It seemed to have a new lease of life in 2016 after it was adopted, well, first of all, by Wigan fans for their player Will Grigg, and then the striker went to the Euros with Northern Ireland and never played. But then, as so often with popular songs, it was fan anthems. It was adopted by many other countries, and suddenly every defence was being terrified.
Yeah. Well, it was played in the Olympics as well, wasn't it? All throughout Paris, I noticed in the stadiums. But maybe FIFA, because this competition is struggling a little bit at the moment, it seems like, to raise the money that Infantino wanted, those billions for the Club World Cup. Maybe you're going to have to cut costs. And as you said, DJ Khaled or Red One, another guy they tend to use very often, might not be available at a favourable price for this because they still need to raise a hell of a lot of money to distribute.
So you're saying FIFA's not on fire?
Well, Ziegs?
Do you think FIFA's is terrified? And it's
well,
not
certainly
going to get
the domestic leagues and players' unions are.
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of fire there, that's for sure. We don't need to labour that. We talked about these lawsuits related to some of this in the past, but yeah. Well, I think we have to get some announcements soon. I think in the next has to be the weeks, at least a couple of months, for where these matches are going to be played and where people can watch them. Surely soon.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we actually, I think, broke this a few weeks ago on the pod. They've scrapped the Spanish name for the competition. It's back to Club World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's going to be East Coast, doesn't it? So, but it is strange that so close to the tournament, you don't actually know the venues. And the other thing I'm going to say about the Club World Cup, the new 30-team tournament, is you had a situation where Bank of America was announced as a FIFA World Cup sponsor for 2026 a couple of weeks ago, but I'm surprised that they didn't sort of do some sort of deal where that would also cover the Club World Cup.
Now, interestingly, though, there was a lot of disquiet, wasn't there, from FIFA about the lack of coverage of this Bank of America sponsorship of the 2026 World Cup. But we'd actually mentioned it on the pod a few weeks ago. We didn't reference it cynically at all, just discuss, was this the start of an influx perhaps of North American sponsors? But there was a tweet suddenly, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was a very, very kind of alarming tweet as well. It was kind of expressing frustration. Rob, do you have the language there at all?
So this was a tweet that's, at the time of recording, had 2 million views from Brian Swanson, who we know well, the Director of Media Relations, and he said, "This commercial agreement," referencing Bank of America, "is further evidence of how FIFA has changed. There are still a handful of cynics out there who criticise us for no reason and without even acknowledging facts." The facts being bolded up if you get your verified account. You can now bold things. The facts are that major organizations such as Bank of America and many others want to work with us. FIFA has regained credibility in the football and business world. FIFA is important in our global society. By the end of 2026, more than $5 billion will have been made available to associations around the world in the past 10 years to develop and grow the game. These facts would have been unimaginable less than a decade ago. That's how the post on X finished. Well, a lot to unpack from there. First of all, Tariq, you asked Brian if he'd come on.
I did. He said he's busy, but to be fair to Brian, he said at some point he would. So open invitation to Brian.
Now, first of all, a lot of comms people are anonymous, not even named, don't go on the record. We've talked previously about lack of statements. This is FIFA at least putting their viewpoint across, although we've not had the chance to ask our own questions because they didn't hold a press conference or a briefing to announce this sponsorship, which might have gained it even more coverage.
That's a surprise, FIFA not doing that, isn't it? Gianni Infantino not fronting up to announce this big deal that he's so proud of?
Guys, by the way, let's go back a bit. Rob, you're right in terms of fronting it up. I remember in the old days, there was Thierry Weil, the FIFA marketing director. He would often be available for announcements, and there would be these briefings and press conferences where you can ask these questions. And we talked in the earlier pod about context to news and stories. What do you want to say? Just Bank of America's sponsoring FIFA, great. Yeah, the news is out there, and the rest of it they might want to engage with rather than maybe put that tweet out. We could have discussed this. And what are they referencing? Doesn't it draw more attention to what? The fact that there was a big corruption case in the United States in 2015? Would we even be thinking about that when the Bank of America sponsorship's announced? Now, you know what I mean? I don't know why that message needed to be sent out, if I'm honest. And it reminded me of Rafa Benitez, the former Liverpool manager, when he was up against Manchester United, I think in 2009, and he appeared at a press conference with a piece of paper that he sort of plucked out of his pocket and started it as facts, and then that became viral and a kind of a meme years later. I just didn't understand it, to be honest, Rob.
But the reason to bring up the past prosecutions against FIFA officials in the Sepp Blatter era would be, for their perspective, show how much they've changed. They actually want to claim they've transformed the organisation and they've made it attractive to sponsors again. Now, as our friend Graham Dunbar pointed out, FIFA has had banking sponsors since that scandal in Russia, in Qatar, domestically. Both their major banks backed those World Cups. In domestic sponsorship deals, yes, and this is a primary deal, so it is a higher level one, and it is a corporation. It's not state linked as we had in Qatar and Russia in terms of those banks. So it is a private entity.
Do we know the terms? Do we know the terms of the deal when it runs through, or how much for? Do we have those details?
No, and that's what often makes something newsworthy. What makes a sponsorship newsworthy? An average fan around the world does not care about Bank of America. They've rather either rarely heard of them or they don't encounter them because they don't bank with them. So what makes a sponsorship story interesting? If you've switched from one big corporation to the other, if you've had a sort of Nike Adidas switch, if you're a major entity, or if you know the numbers and it's like a huge number you can tell people, and maybe fans are interested, then you can tell the story how that money will be spent in football.
And if it's just to 2026, which is the World Cup in America, wouldn't we be expecting that? I mean, we're going to expect more American sponsors to sponsor the American World Cup and North American World Cup. Mexico and Canada, the tournaments played, but predominantly in America. The idea that a big American company is sponsoring the American World Cup, is it that outlandish?
No, of course it's not. I can't remember, for example, the last time I did a sponsorship story around the International Olympic Committee, UEFA, World Athletics. The only one I've done recently is, I can think of, is that Aramco was going to sponsor FIFA. But
because it's newsworthy.
There was more to that story.
Yeah. It's massively newsworthy. All Gazprom.
Well, yes, I get it myself. Yeah, because there is a story around that. Because Aramco is the majority Saudi state-owned oil company, and Saudi Arabia is hoping to stage the 2034 World Cups. It's, there's a story there. Gazprom and UEFA's sponsorship, and how UEFA was forced to drop Gazprom from after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So, yeah, it's got to have some sort of wider context in order to be of interest, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I did an interview with Christian Horner a few years ago in a previous role, because it was linked to having a sponsorship announcement. So it was a way of doing an interview with him at the Red Bull Team HQ. Tariq, what about this aspect about this shows that we're trusted? This is referencing, again, how the Department of Justice have seemingly given their ringing endorsement to FIFA.
Well, they haven't. So this. We can go back to May of this year, where FIFA routinely, whenever you ask them, say they're trusted, and the fact that they quoted the Department of Justice in America, which is the organization that led the prosecutions in 2015, 16, and beyond, as sort of giving them a clean bill of health. At least in those FIFA statements, that's what it would be appearing to say. So I've checked with them, and they were quite surprised that FIFA was using that language, and said FIFA's reforms and what FIFA is doing as an organization, its operations, they've never done that at all. Yes, FIFA is a victim status with CONMEBOL and CONCACAF as a result of those corruption scandals. And there is this restitution money that is being distributed. And that is about the long and short of it. And to be honest, this other thing, just to go back on this, the World Cup is going to be in America. There's going to be billions of viewers around the world watching this football tournament. Companies are mercantile. I don't think they care that much really about any of this stuff unless the media heat gets really hot. Don't forget, it took ages for the FIFA sponsors in the Blatter era to kind of raise their voice. There was all sorts of things going on. Let's be honest, sponsors really, really don't care until it gets really mucky. This World Cup is going to be massive. They're going to be attracted to it, and that's how it works.
Brian's tweet, there was some people criticising him for adopting this pro-FIFA position. He posted about genuinely believe in developing football around the world. And if you actually distill his language, he did talk about those who criticise for no reason without even acknowledging facts. So it's almost suggesting, well, maybe criticism, commentary, analysis is fine as long as you do put the facts in and around it, or put the FIFA.
What are those facts about developing the game? Can we just stop there for a second again? FIFA's mission, its job, is to develop the game. Your job is to go on Sky or Martyn, me writing the paper. Our job is to write news stories or that. So what Brian is saying is FIFA is not getting credit to do what it says on the side of the tin, but we expect FIFA to develop the game, don't we? That's why all of these billions are being raised. That's why it's a development organisation doing development. What are we supposed to say about that?
Well, they might point to the Blatter era when they were handing themselves tens of millions of bonuses just for the World Cup being staged successfully, when it was the top leadership at the time. And, we've seen...
What's that got to do with football development?
Well, they'd say more money football is going into football development, wouldn't they, as a result? It's not going into World Cup-related bonuses on the scale of the sort of...
Okay. So let me ask, it's quite an interesting conversation, this. So we've got a FIFA council that's got bigger since the Blatter era, bloated, which hardly takes any major decisions anymore, certainly not where the World Cup is going to be. It's still very opaque. They are paid more than in the period under Blatter for less work. And often these meetings are on Zoom. Now, I don't know if that's good governance, the way Saudi Arabia was handed the World Cup. We still haven't had a press conference about that more than a year later. Is that good governance? There's just all these things that are happening that suggest there is a lot of issues that require people to look at how FIFA works.
And it comes down to, if you can't discuss this change in a briefing, in a press conference, how can you report on it? Because you can't put some of those points across and hear how they would respond to allow you to then provide those answers to analyse it, because it's not us bringing it up, it's other people within football. It's head of the Norwegian Federation, Lisa Klaveness, who's raised questions about the World Cup awarding process. So we're waiting to hear how they would answer it, although they did actually say that it did go to the council for a vote. There was several weeks given for other bids to come forward, although that was a fast-track process, so it perhaps gave rival bids very little to no time. We know the detail of what led to the 6 being combined for 2030. In fact, we've never been able to discuss that in a press conference in any form, to discuss the logistics, even the environmental impact of all that as well. So, yeah, is it natural there is cynicism if you can't have a dialogue and back and forth to delve into how things are being run at FIFA?
Yeah,
it is a social media presidency.
You can't have your cake and eat it. If you're not prepared to front up and put yourself forward to ask questions, then you can't really complain if people don't write what you want them to write. You've got to provide that sort of access. I had an interesting exchange with the FIFA communications officer a couple of weeks ago. I asked him a question about the video game that FIFA is supposed to be working on to replace the old EA Sports game that it had the commercial deal with, and was told no comment, basically. We'll send you the statement we released 2 years ago. I mean,
and that's not cynical reporting on some sort of matters of the council or governance. It's actually on something that engages millions and millions of football fans and gamers around the world.
Yeah, people will be interested in that, and it would be nice to know, especially given whenever the FIFA president's talked about it, he says it's going to be the best game ever, and it's coming. So maybe some more flesh on the bones with that. And in terms of, it's not only criticism, it's some of the work Arsene Wenger's been doing has been highlighted, and it's interesting. It's been talked about. The football stuff, Women's World Cup in Australia was a big success, and people talked about that as well. I mean, I just think this kind of, it was just surprising to see that, especially on the back of something like a sponsorship deal.
Quite an interesting comms approach like that. I mean, someone else who's very active in the world of communications in sport is Christian Klau. He's the Corporate Communications and Public Affairs Director at the International Olympic Committee. Very active during the Olympics, and since then it was the AP Stephen Wade who put out a tweet the other week saying the IOC is not a city planner. Areas like Stratford, this is in London, don't need Olympics to be developed. Olympics only drive up costs because of tight deadlines. Olympics should not drive public policy. It's kind of crazy to think so. This was linking to a Bloomberg story, which is about Olympic legacies of cities. And actually, Christian from the IOC did put this whole long post in response about the IOC is not a city planner, would never claim to. The games adapt to the city, not the city to the games, talking about the job that Paris has done. So it's quite an interesting level of engagement. Also, I would say, Steve, overlooked how, say, the Olympics did benefit London. Maybe you could say spending could be justified more in other areas, but certainly transform the Stratford area probably in a quicker way that wouldn't have been achieved without the games. And it is a busy area since the games.
Yes, you can make an argument for London, certainly. Although the counter argument is that it could have been developed sort of cheaper and better without needing to build a sort of huge stadium, which is costing London taxpayers money and will do for the rest of its existence. But perhaps if you look at Rio, for example, there's certainly a counter argument for the sort of benefits of the Olympics to a city in terms of developing the area.
Some of those counter arguments are sat in Brazilian prisons right now because of the massive legacy of corruption related to some of those projects. But I think there's an academic in Oxford, at Oxford University, I forget his name now, and he's written a number of reports on the spiraling costs and the kind of cost benefit analysis to cities, and he comes up with all of them are a bit of a drain. That said, these events, I guess, for Paris, it did. I did for most people. It put a smile on people's faces. But do you pay? It's a really tricky one, isn't it? How much are you be paying for this stuff?
And is that just
a huge amount of money?
Is that just us seeing a narrow part of Paris, one small part of France in terms of when you attempt to reflect the national mood. Actually, I did, I don't know if anyone went and did a piece going around France to get a sense of villages, towns all around the country to see how much the Olympics actually impacted them.
Yeah, I don't know, but you could kind of tell from the success of, say, someone like Léon Marchand, the swimmer.
Yeah.
The fact is, maybe a lot of people didn't know who he was. And this guy, it's not a footballer or from one of those big sports, becomes a national hero and someone people rally around and someone's talking about. I don't know. Do I think the Olympics are too big? Absolutely. They're so big. Do they need to be that enormous? That's a different conversation. But the fact that they can make countries smile for a week, or some people, that's part of the story as well, isn't it?
And there weren't protests. There wasn't uproar outside the stadiums, angry about, the cost. There weren't sort of, notable things like that developing across France during the games, and the Olympics was finished. Then they had the break to realign things ahead of the Paralympics, to reconfigure everything. And, full venues, particularly at the Stade de France, looking absolutely packed for athletics. That hasn't happened at the Paralympics since 2012, since London, because Rio had its challenges bringing the crowds in. Tokyo had none to very few fans because of the pandemic. So it certainly has lifted the Olympic movement. I mean, interestingly, actually, it's something that Johnny Peacock, the British runner, did raise about the lack of integration of para-athletics in World Athletics events.
Yeah, that's always been a challenge, isn't it? That the Paralympics happens, and then the interest just drops off so dramatically. But I think you could probably also say that for lots of Olympic sports as well, isn't it? It's not just Paralympics. It's like most Olympic sports, you'd say. They get huge audiences, and suddenly people don't watch in between the Olympics. So I think the Paralympics suffers in the same way from that.
Yeah, Peacock said, Seb Coe, we need you to put us in the actual Diamond League, not into a cheerleader event, not 5 minutes before the cameras turn on. We need to be visible. It makes them look good. Stick them on before anyone gets in a seat and we can pretend it looks good. Yeah, it took about mixing up the events to ensure that it has that visibility. But of course, the Paralympics and the IPC does organise many sports. It's para-athletics that organises athletics, not world athletics. FIFA doesn't have any disability sport divisions at all in terms of running competitions. And perhaps, Tariq, it would come back to the point you often make on women's football, that it does need its own entity to be able to promote it. So perhaps if World Athletics was looking after para-athletics and able-bodied athletics, they wouldn't potentially focus their resources only on able-bodied. So you need that dedicated division and an organisation.
Maybe in terms of something like that, but the idea of in an event, you have these like a couple of races or 3 races on a night schedule. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, and maybe gets people watching. But that said, I think the Diamond League is coming to a conclusion. I'm here in Britain. I couldn't tell you what channel it's going to be on. Do you know anyone?
The BBC has the rights in the UK, but it doesn't really have that wider narrative. And of course, why? In part because of the absolute dominance of football, which brings us back to where we started the pod, and this Club World Cup that's going to be taking place next June and July in the United States. 32 teams. It's going to encroach into cricket territory if you're talking about a UK audience. Something interesting, I must say, some of the language around this FIFA announcement talked about the Club World Cup. You only have to assume, because it doesn't actually say, it is the men's Club World Cup. They have said there are plans for a women's competition, but even by creating a new competition, they don't make the gender specific. And it is something that changed at the UEFA European season launch last week compared to previous years. All the signage for the first time said men's club competitions season launch, specified men's, because the women events have their draws later on.
Yeah, that's a welcome change. I do think, I'm not sure it is going to dominate everything next summer. I think that's part of FIFA's problem, is that it might well not, because I think there'll be interest in the latter stages of the competition. But I think there's a real challenge for the group stages, because I think it's not quite like the World Cup. When there's countries involved, I don't think people are going to be tuning in to seeing the champions of Saudi Arabia playing against the champions of South Korea, for example. I just don't see that happening.
There won't be a sort of period of almost silence where the clubs go quiet. We're going to have Pep Guardiola speaking often. We talk about transfers, and it perhaps be those things that dominate the conversation where, say, in UK terms, the back pages won't be about things like cricket because there'll be so much Chelsea conversation and City conversation, even more so. So it's much from our focus. And of course, it will actually potentially, by the time it reaches the end and it crosses over the start of the women's Euros, it will displace some of that coverage and window for the women's game to be back into the fore in terms of the tournament.
Yeah, that is an issue.
Well, in FIFA's words, we can be perhaps cynical about their governance and their events sometimes. One perspective on the Club World Cup from countering his family, actually. Erling Haaland. Norway don't qualify for major men's competition, so he's got perhaps no chance of winning a trophy with Norway. He could become a world champion by winning the Club World Cup in Manchester City. So you've got to imagine he's someone who's going to relish a Club World Cup. Quite an achievement for Norway would be. Right. Well, so I'm sure Norway would relish being able to celebrate having a world champion footballer. You've got to hope they get his age right, maybe.
Yes, Rob. There was a very funny story this week when the Norway men's football squad assembled ahead of their Nations League matches and had a visit from Anti-Doping Norway, who an official read out a list of players that had to give urine samples. So they were all sitting around waiting, and they read out Erling Haaland, Jørgen Larsen, Antonia Nusa, Oscar Bob, Einar Gundersen, and Jørgen Juve. The only trouble, guys, is that the last two, although they were Norwegian internationals, one of them died in 1983, the other died in 1962.
We're going to have to find those samples somehow, Ziggs. What's the plan? What went wrong here?
I'm just waiting for someone in some sport to then claim it invalidates all doping tests in Norway because they've managed to mess up these ones in football, getting dates wrong. And we know how you can search for loopholes in sports law.
Well, I spoke to via email to Anti-Doping Norway, who said that they don't have a complete overview yet of what happened, but there's no doubt a significant mistake occurred on our part. It appears what they did was somebody drew a list of names from the all-time leading scorers, not realising that some of them had retired or were no longer with us. Then added in a couple of other names from the squad for good measure. But there was, as you can imagine, incredulity and hilarity amongst the squad.
Whoever it is, obviously not a football fan, because if you've gone through the all-time record scorers and you pick these names, you think you probably know them if they were alive, wouldn't you? If they were that good. This reminds me, there was a case in June with UCAD, wasn't there, where they gave a 4-year doping ban to a boxer who died.
Yes, that's correct. A Latin American boxer who had tested positive a year before, then they issued him a 4-year ban. It turned out he'd died a couple of months previously.
Yeah, this Norway case perhaps showing it's best to check the dates. You've got the right year. You're in the right era completely of athlete that you are testing. You wouldn't want to mess that up. But of course, for anyone listening to us, Sport Unlocked, we're always available. You can get us on your record so you can play us on all your gramophones.
Very good, Rob.
And you can message us by Morse code or any other devices.
Carrier pigeons. I seem to have my pigeons back, so do send those along.
But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.